Welcome to the Peacebuilding Practitioner, a resource page and podcast for people working on conflict, on peacebuilding, and on social justice issues. My name is Björn Eser, and I'm the founder of and shaker and maker behind the Peacebuilding Practitioner. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Peacebuilding Practitioners podcast. Season 3 is all about digital peacebuilding, this highly complex, tremendously exciting, often messy and quickly developing intersection where emerging technologies and the digital world on the one hand and conflict transformation, peacebuilding, human rights and social justice work on the other hand meet. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Daniel Duke Odongo from Ushahidi here on the show. It's actually for our new podcast on digital peacebuilding. Yeah, Daniel, who's based in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, can look back at more than a decade of experience making digital tools work for ordinary people. Daniel has an amazing track record of driving hands-on practical tech solutions to address social justice issues in a variety of highly complex, and I might say very demanding contexts. And last but not least, Daniel does so with an immense passion for representation, accessibility, and inclusivity. Daniel, it's a great pleasure for me having you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks for that intimidating introduction.
I'm not even sure if it does justice to all the things you've done. In addition to what I said, what else should people know about you and your background?
Well, I think you've said most of my professional aspect. I think I've spent quite a bit of time supporting digital initiatives across the continent in various capacities, really. But I would prefer to speak about away from work. I love to spend time on the farm. I like spending time on a long drive, either between Uganda and Kenya. And yeah, that's what I do for my pastime, but excited to get into the content around digital peace building today.
Daniel, I said you currently work with Ushahidi. For people who have been working on digital peace building and on tech solutions around conflict issues, around social justice issues, Ushahidi is quite, let's say, a household name. But for all the ones out there who don't know Ushahidi, if you had to describe it to them in just a couple sentences, what do you think is really what characterizes and what sets Ushahidi apart from other companies out there?
Interesting. So I'm compelled to, first of all, share with the audience what Ushahidi actually means. Ushahidi is a Swahili word which means testimony. We started out, I think, in about 2007, right after an election had taken place and violence broke out across Kenya. And Ushahidi then set the pace for what today we call crowdsourcing, because we're able to sort of pull citizen voices around what was taking place. At a time when there was an information blackout, the popular media was not covering what was taking place in the streets across Kenya. And Ushahidi was an innovation that came up at the time to allow communities, citizens to self-report about what they were seeing outside their houses, what they were experiencing. And yeah, today we are proud to say that, over, I think about 15 years later, the tool has now been used across over 160 countries.
Wow.
And there are over 200,000 deployments of Ushahidi active today.
Great. Wow. That sounds intimidating and great. You just mentioned a few keywords. You said, okay, you work with open source software. You said it's citizen-generated data you work with, and you work with what you call deployments. Can you just put a bit more meat to the bone so that people have a clear understanding of what is it you're actually offering and how does it empower people, communities, small organizations to work on their very own issues?
Yeah, so open source as we know it at Ushahidi is basically allowing citizens or communities to speak out or contribute in decisions that are being made about them. So beyond just the term open source as we know it for those who are software developers, saying that there's code that is easily accessible. But at Ushahidi, beyond just the code, we are actually allowing citizens to take part in decisions affecting them, because it's well known out there that citizens typically in any crisis situation are less represented in decisions that are being made. And Ushahidi comes in as a platform that enables them to channel their feedback in their own words and make sure that decision makers have access to this and can make decisions that are representative of the aspirations and needs of the communities. So over the years, we have been playing quite a big role within the field of crowdsourcing as a tool that anyone can take, put on their servers, and start collecting information about, the needs of the communities that they would like to have. typically anyone who uses the Ushahidi platform is able to start using it with even very little technical know-how. And we're very proud about that.
Where you said working with crowdsourced citizen-collected data, I think that's great. When you said you were mentioning that the very idea, the first initiatives or the first playing around with what could a tech offer to people in a surrounding, you mentioned the 2007, 2008 violence around the elections in Kenya. Crowdsourcing what is happening in the country, where intimidation is taking place, where violence is taking place, where the security forces are maybe playing a good role and where they're not playing a good role. I think that's quite great as a concept. How do you balance kind of the threat that people say, well, at the moment, the big tech companies collect so much data, then how do we make it work for people in their very own initiatives where they actually are in the driver's seat of making use of data? How do you bring these two trends together?
Okay, so it's very interesting. First of all, just picking off what you've just shared, I think transparency and accountability are core to the work that we do, making sure that, first of all, citizens' opinions about what is taking place as it is without any form of censorship is possible, and we are enabling that as a platform. Yeah. It's core to our existence that we continue making that possible for different communities, including those that are most marginalized across the world. And I think just the concept around, in comparison to big tech, I think the censorship part is something that we are very clear from the get-go, just to make sure that citizens' voices should be known. I mean, there shouldn't be no sort of filters to their ability to express themselves.
Yeah.
And so we allow anyone to be able to start collecting these voices. But in terms of safety, we have still protocols to make sure that there's anonymization, especially for some communities that might be at risk. And we have all of this factored in for each deployment. We have workflows embedded within the platform that allow them to be able to, one, verify the reports that they're receiving, structure them, because in many cases they're unstructured. So you mentioned like security issues. One might want to know only the security issues around a certain issue. One might want to have gender issues only within a particular context. And Ushahidi allows you to structure those reports. There's geolocation, just so that, communities can be able to be linked to the support that they need and require at a particular time where they are. Eventually, we also try to make sure that reports are published to the world, so that there's a body of knowledge that everyone, both the media or the general public or even research community, can tap into. And then there's the most important key around making sure that those who are reporting are safe.
Yeah.
Safe in the sense that they can be able to still protect their identities, especially communities that might be at risk or that are marginalized. So these are some of the functionalities within Ushahidi that enable us to stand out as a platform that is crowdsourcing citizen feedback, but while at the same time protecting them from harms that typically big tech would expose them to.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. I think that makes things so much clearer. And if I just look back at some of my experiences, I saw a deployment of yours before I even knew about Ushahidi, I must say. Shame on me.
Wow.
Just probably as an example, and you can probably then add other examples later on, just so that the listeners get a clear idea on what is actually all the power in the application and how can it be used by ordinary people, as you said, with little to hardly no tech background to actually make it work for social justice and respective other issues. I've been working in Nepal some time back, and there was an organization called COCAP, Collective Campaign for Peace, which worked on human rights defenders work all over the country. And they had something which was called the Nepal Monitor, basically a map of Nepal, where you could, according to certain filters, look at various human rights abuses around political issues, around gender-based issues, around caste-based issues, around economic issues, and others. And as you said, it was collecting data, crowdsourced, so anyone from all over the country could report human rights abuses. And at the same time, because we very often have lots of early warning, but not a lot of early action, human rights defenders or international media or the international diplomatic community could either just look at the map and filter and say, where's something happening? Where can we get active? Or human rights defenders in the very respective areas could say, I would like to get automatically reports about human rights abuses in my area, let's say a circle of 15, 20, 25 kilometers, so that human rights defenders would know right away where what is happening and could go into early action mode. And I thought it was quite impressive because it was such a participatory, inclusive, at the same time verified and safe way to have real-time data about what's happening in the country in the run-up to an election, after certain international events. And I thought it was really great. And as you said, rather easy to do from the provider side, so from the organization who set up this application or used your basic framework to then tailor it to their needs. And at the same time, also from the users, from the crowdsourcing users side. I thought it was quite impressive. And only years later, I actually got to know you and your company and learned more about the back end, so to speak. Danny, could you probably tell us one or two other deployments where you say, well, this is really something where we saw whatever you offer in terms of tech and the experiences you have to organizations or to government departments or to others where you had the feeling, wow, this is really another great example of a deployment?
Well, almost every Ushahidi deployment is a powerful story or testimony of how communities are self-organizing in very inspiring ways, just like the Nepal deployment that you've talked about, which is one of my favorites, actually. But I think I take us back to, the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. There were so many movement restrictions. There were so many people who were scared because, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to protect themselves. They didn't know how to access services, especially during the time when there were lots of quarantine measures. And a community in Spain, I think they self-organized under the banner called Frena la Curva. And this community essentially set up an Ushahidi deployment to allow community members to be able to share what their immediate needs would be during the quarantine measures. But also not only that, but they were also directing them to where to be able to access resources right within their community. And all this coordination was taking place within their Ushahidi deployment. Why this is particularly very impactful is because within a couple of weeks, we were able to see over 1,500 deployments replicate exactly what Frena la Curva was doing in Spain. Yeah, it's quite inspiring to see more than 1,500 deployments replicate this exact model all through the region. And I think this was one of the very most impactful stories that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic of the use of Ushahidi. Fast forward, I could also just highlight, a couple of communities across the coastal region of Kenya that have self-organized because of the violence that was taking place in the street. And they're being able to use an Ushahidi deployment to map, the causes of the violence, the hotspots of the violence. And this is helping not only the community members be able to devise means of, countering the causes of this violence, the drivers of the violence, but decision makers are also able to start to figure out where the hotspots are and figure out where their attention could be. So those are two deployments that I could easily talk about right now. But like I said, each of the couple 100,000 deployments of Ushahidi out there is an impactful story that a community is self-organizing using the technology that we offer.
Great. I will put some links in the show notes, obviously to your page and your organization, but probably also to some of the deployments so that people who want to read a bit more into how does it actually work, how does it actually look like, and what are concrete examples so that people actually have the chance to go more into depth there. Daniel, just one more on kind of the practical side. You said, okay, the deployment can be worked into the servers from whatever organization or community group wants to use it, and with very little to, not very demanding in terms of the programming expertise you need to have. And in addition, I know you also assist organizations to work it into their servers if need be. How easy and how does it actually work from the user side? So if I have something, I want to be part of a deployment, I want to feed information into collecting human rights abuses, collecting data about what you said, violence in the coastal regions of Kenya, or about any other deployment. How do I get involved, and what technical skills or gadgets do I need to have to actually be one of the sources of a movement to feed the data into a deployment?
Sounds good. Great question. So all communities that self-organize to start using Ushahidi to collect reports around the issues they're experiencing, first of all, have recognized that there is a challenge. There's a challenge that requires collective action, mass action around the specific issue. Typically, Ushahidi has seen this around climate action in the recent years, but also human rights protection, crisis response, and good governance. So when one community organizer sets up an Ushahidi deployment, and which I must emphasize, they require little to no technical expertise, not even programming, little to no technical expertise to set up that deployment. Then they start collecting reports from the community, and they've set up surveys to ask community members about the issues that are affecting them. one of the most critical parts about that process is they need to have awareness about the deployment. And like you said, so how do I start sharing my voice about the issues that affect me? Deployment owners typically will go on radio shows and talk about the deployment, why they need to collect the data, how they'll collect the data, how it will be handled, and why it is very important for community members to join together in the cause of using Ushahidi to collect their voices around that particular issue identified. So this awareness process, community organizers, just because of the position that they typically hold in societies, they use their influence to be able to rally around community members using the channels that are available to them. In the coastal regions of Kenya, for example, internet access may not always be the best, but we've seen community members tap into the voices of leaders within the community, influencers within the community. For women groups, they have leaders within this community who typically rally themselves around maybe gender or financial issues. And these are the same people who go out using their trusted status within this community to spread the word about how community members should start sharing feedback using the Ushahidi platform. In other societies, we've been able to see some organizations even carry out television adverts or radio stations, like I mentioned, or even send out SMS notifications just alerting you to how you can be able to share your feedback. And Ushahidi has multiple channels, SMS, USSD within low resource communities. But then we also have mobile applications, both Android and iOS, where community champions may actually go door to door collecting this feedback. And then we have actually started testing out WhatsApp because of its just the sheer popularity of it to act as a data source. So there's a phone number that you could send a prompt and then automatically you'll receive a survey and you start filling in and sharing your opinion, not only when prompted, but also whenever you feel the need to do so. So these are just the multi-channel approach that we offer the communities that are using Ushahidi, just to diversify the voices that are shared for feedback on particular issues.
Yeah, great. And I like what you pointed out, kind of this, how do we constantly re-evaluate and then find the right balance over and over again between making sure that we work on the basis of prior informed consent. What you said earlier, community organizers go out, talk to people about what they're interested, how people can participate, but also about safety and security issues, about how data is used in the collection process, but also later in the interpretation and where it's used for calls to action. So I think that is really important. And at the same time, making sure we work with the trends in technology. And yes, we know around the pros and cons around Facebook and WhatsApp and others. But at the same time, as you said, these are the places where people are. And if you want to tap into community mobilization power, you need to meet them where they are. And at the same time, find the right balance of, making sure it's ethical and it's prior informed consent. And at the same time, we get the momentum we want. And I think it's great how you constantly in your organization kind of see how do we find the right balance and how do we still make it user friendly and make sure it works for everybody.
Yeah, the powerful part about finding communities where they are, leveraging the channels available to them, and using existing structures to be able to gather their voices, raise those voices, and make sure that there are decisions that are being made that are representative of those voices that have been shared.
Yeah, so many important points here. Daniel, if we change our focus a bit, we looked back and we looked at the highlights and some of the challenges and some of the really exciting work you and your organization have been involved in. If we look into the future, what's coming up for Ushahidi? Any exciting new developments where you say, well, we're working on something and there seems to be new exciting things coming up? Or what's 2023 and 2024 bringing for open source mapping software for social justice work and for Ushahidi?
I would start by giving the broad goal of what we're trying to do. I think just for our 5-year strategy up to 2026. We're trying to raise 20 million voices. Typically, that means we're trying to almost, scale up the number of people who are using the platform to self-organize, to make sure that decisions are being made and policies and decisions actually, very importantly, lead to systemic change for communities. So that's the broad goal of what we're trying to do. And we're trying to seed plenty of partnerships and bring together lots of stakeholders or people who believe in this mission around that same purpose. Within the team internally, I think it may not be too early to let the cat out of the basket. We are releasing a new version of the platform over the next coming months.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's quite exciting. All of us at Ushahidi are excited. And we're already starting to test out, some of the features of this version of the platform. And I think what I would like to highlight is the fact that we are trying to bring in more automation within the platform, because we felt that some of the workflows to be able to carry out tasks within the Ushahidi platform are a bit manual, I must say.
Yeah.
And I think this was by design, simply because the number of reports we used to collect from communities were few. But with increased digitization, with increased access to digital tools and channels, many deployment owners of Ushahidi are receiving a larger volume of reports from communities.
Yeah.
And we want to make it easier for them to handle these reports that they're receiving. And there'll be a bit of more automation coming in there. I probably mentioned something about using WhatsApp, but also we're trying to see how many more channels that users or communities already have access to, we can tap into to offer, as avenues to collect reports. So I think that that's what I would ask our audience to look out for. Please follow us keenly. We are typically looking for testers every now and then, just in case maybe you want to tinker around and get access to some of these early features. Feel free to reach out to anyone on the Ushahidi team, and there'll be a link, I think, on how you could take part in this process.
I'll make sure we put a link into the show notes. Maybe we do that right now. If people want to look up the current site and probably get in touch with you, what's the best way? Where do they find you?
We are literally everywhere. So on social media, if you check out our Twitter, we are quite active on there. Our Facebook, our Instagram, you'll get regular updates. And if you send us a DM, our team will be able to respond as soon as possible. But also besides that, for those within the open source community, GitHub is where our code is at. We have a very active community that is contributing code, but also just asking questions, asking ways in which, some functionalities might work. There's our team that's ready to respond to you on there. And we typically love to avail ourselves as well in-person activities. John, you and I met at one of the forums that was discussing digital.
It was a real pleasure.
Absolutely. And so we love to avail ourselves in person, because we know that's where the magic happens. That's where we get to meet our users, understand their needs and challenges. So typically around the world, if there's anything related to open source communities, Ushahidi typically wants to have a presence in there. And when there are organizations that I need within each of our focus areas that I mentioned earlier, Ushahidi tries to reach out. If there's an earthquake, we typically want to understand who is organizing around that. If there's a conflict, like right now, there's one in Sudan, we're trying to figure out who is doing what around the negotiation and how do we get communities' voices represented along that negotiation process. So we typically try to avail ourselves, just say Ushahidi, and we'll say, here we are.
That's a great offer. Let me just connect to that point right away, because as some people know, we met back in April in Germany, in Loccum, at a conference on digital peacebuilding, emerging technologies, and their use in conflict transformation, peacebuilding, mediation work. If you broaden your scope, and I know you're very involved also with other groundbreaking, pioneering people, organizations who work on quite a variety of this whole field of what goes under the umbrella term digital peacebuilding, both in better understanding tech and digital as a conflict driver, as well as making it work for peacebuilding practitioners at all levels, community level, all the way up to big UN mediation processes, on see how can we harvest the potential of emerging tech and accessibility and inclusion for these processes. If you look at the current trend and your engagement with others, what do you think are exciting developments besides or beyond what Ushahidi is doing? What are some of the things where you are really either see great potential or really thrilled, or probably see really new threats coming up? Could you just let us in on your experience here a bit?
It's great that you mentioned this. And I think one of the buzzwords today that everyone is talking about or looking out for is artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And I think that good, familiar, double-edged sword, I would say. And I'll start with the positives about it. I mean, we're really excited about the potential of artificial intelligence to be able to ease work for very many groups of people, whether you're a community organizer. I think it would be very easy for you to sift through the issues that you're facing, experiencing, or receiving from the community in terms of feedback. It would also be very easy for very many communities then to be able to learn now to anticipate rather than respond. So we're always in response mode, typically in the human rights space. But how about you start to, forecast what will come in maybe the next 1 or 2 years, and how you start preparing yourself for that. So I think the capabilities are very immense. Potential is very, very exciting for how artificial intelligence might make processes and work easier for many of us. However, at the same time, the way artificial intelligence is being built is a bit concerning, I would say, because just a few voices have been represented within the process of building algorithms, the way in which, AI systems are being built. They typically are biased towards certain groups that, typically inform the process of building or developing them.
Yeah.
So as a result, I think the risk that I would like to highlight that concerns myself and typically at Ushahidi we like to think about a lot is how then might we make sure that underrepresented groups are part of AI development processes? How do we inform the development process behind these algorithms? And how do we make sure they are safe?
How
do we make sure they're safe and they're not exacerbating existing challenges that we already have within communities today around the world? So that's something that I would like to highlight, just for us to appreciate the good, but be cautious enough and take it step by step and making sure that everyone is represented.
I think you're mentioning at least two important points here. This, on the one hand, obviously being more proactive, anticipating and not just reactive. And at the same time, as you said, with artificial intelligence, all the big language learning models, whose language, whose underlying values, how do we see the world is all represented in our language models. And if our language, so to speak, is not part of these models, obviously it doesn't feed into the artificial intelligence and how it develops further. Yeah, really important. Daniel, last but not least, I also want to make sure this podcast not just informs people about the various organizations and topics the respective interview guest like you is talking about, but at the same time, I want to make sure each and every guest has the chance to recommend one other organization or publication or resource or software or whatever, something to encourage people to also look up other really great resources. What would be a resource that you could recommend beyond anything that is directly connected to Ushahidi?
I think I'll recommend an organization that has been putting together quite a bit of forums just to address the challenges in peace, especially in this digital era. And I think that is Build Peace. The Build Peace Forum takes place every year. This year actually is taking place in Nairobi between 1st and 3rd. But also, if you could just look up the organization, howtobuildpeace.org. You can be able to check out the exciting work they're doing. Their work surpasses, just beyond the technology. But right now, I think this year they're looking at how the art influence identities relevant to peace and conflict. I find that exciting as someone who has an eye on the arts, and I know that the arts typically influence society. So I would highly recommend the Build Peace team.
So I got to make sure I also link them in the show notes. And you mentioned a conference, a get-together, a community of practitioners talking for a couple of days between the 1st and the 3rd of December, I think, in Nairobi. I'm also going to make sure I link that. So great resources which people can look at. Daniel, it's been a real pleasure. I think we could probably continue talking here for another hour or 2 or 3. Unfortunately, our time is up. I really want to thank you. It's been another inspiring chat, and I really hope we meet again someday. I won't make it to Nairobi later this year, so we have to look for another opportunity. But if you're in the area, let me know. Thank you very much for taking the time, and thank you very much for sharing your immense experience and really making the Ushahidi platform, the tech behind it, really concrete for people so that they have a good understanding of which resources are out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Always a pleasure to exchange ideas, insights. Exciting to be able to contribute to, perspectives on this podcast, and looking forward, of course, to catching up whenever we could meet in person when it allows.
So much for today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of the future episodes. And I would really appreciate if you leave me a rating on iTunes, on Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you want to learn more about the Peacebuilding Practitioner, head over to my webpage. That's www.thepeacebuildingpractitioner.org, where you find plenty of articles from practitioners for practitioners. And if you want to dive even deeper into this field of work, join us for one of our online courses. If you want to learn more about that, just get in contact with me. You'll find the contact details in the show notes or on my webpage.